Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm Dr. Ryan Lowry, for those of you who don't know. A little bit about myself and background. We've been doing research on ketosis, the ketogenic diet, and ketones for over a decade. And so we started looking at a ketogenic diet and saw all of these incredible benefits. And soon we started realizing it was ketones, BHB, that was driving a lot of the benefits of the ketogenic diet. And so together, as a team with Pruvit, we brought ketones to the market, which is absolutely amazing. And I couldn't be more excited.
Ketones have been around as a fuel for billions of years.
Humans have been in and out of ketosis since the beginning of humans. In fact, before humans, earlier primates.
They're a normal energy source. It's, again, a normal part of our physiologic metabolism.
So the first single-cell organisms, one of the three fuels that they use and still use today are ketones.
Ketone is a molecule. There's three of them that are made when your body breaks down fatty acids: beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone.
So in a period of starvation, our livers essentially oxidize or burn fat. And as a consequence of that, we produce ketones.
So ketosis is a normal physiologic process in the body.
When our body transitions over and we're no longer burning glucose, but we're burning fats for fuel, we're moving into a state of ketosis. We're continually making those ketone bodies.
A ketogenic diet is, by definition, a low carbohydrate diet. But low carbohydrate diet just means you're simply lowering the amount of carbohydrates you're eating. The definition of it varies significantly, and we've been on a high carbohydrate diet for so many years. 50 to 150 grams of carbs per day is generally accepted as a low carbohydrate diet. Most people, to get into ketosis, need to eat less than 50 grams of carbohydrates per day and have to minimize their protein. It's not the case with everyone. Some people have to get even lower, but you have to get those carbs down so low that when your blood sugar starts dropping, your liver starts making ketones, and thus you're into ketosis.
Scientists are, by definition, skeptics. We are professional skeptics, right? So you have to be critically skeptic of both your work and other people's work. And so being able to see the research that's being done by my colleagues, new papers are being published literally every week, uncovering benefits of ketosis.
Whenever I'm fully on a ketogenic diet, I just feel very stable and lots of energy even into the night. I can stay focused for longer periods, and that's definitely my favorite.
Keto Nat is really the next iteration, the new disruptive technology, the new innovation that Pruvit has brought to market. And basically the main difference is the process in which it's manufactured. It is the first and only naturally fermented ketone that's ever been developed.
The ketones in your body look like this. They're what we call right-handed ketones. So when your body makes ketones, they're right-handed. When you do normal manufacturing, you make right and left-handed. So right-handed and left-handed. The problem is, I want you to think of like a key. So ketones are not just for fat loss, they're signaling molecules. So if you're gonna go and put a key in a door, it's got to fit a certain way. But if that key were switched to the exact mirror opposite, can it open your door? No.
Well, first and foremost, we know that as we get older, our brain isn't able to utilize glucose and carbohydrates as well. And after the age of 30, the older we get and the worse our diet is, the more resistant our brain is to glucose and carbohydrates. It's almost as if our brain is starving for energy, but we just need to provide it the right source of fuel. And that fuel that it still can utilize is ketones. Ketones are signaling molecules, right? Imagine a light switch that you turn on and off. Well, as we get older, the genes inside of our body, our DNA, the light switch starts to get turned off over time. Ketones are not just a fuel source. They are signaling molecules that help keep the light switch on. And study after study shows that ketones are acting as signaling molecules that not only can help with longevity and lifespan by keeping the light switch on, but also have other signaling cascades far beyond what most people recognize. I've actually been drinking ketones for a little over 7 years, believe it or not, which is crazy. I've been doing a ketogenic diet for a little over 10. And that's where kind of my journey started. So we published studies on anything you can imagine, from nutrition, supplement, exercise. Tons of studies were published and really got interested in the ketogenic diet. Not so for myself, but I had a lot of family members, and I'm sure this story is very similar to many of you. Obesity runs prevalent in my family. And I was like, you know what? Like, what if there was a chance that like, we just weren't eating right? We weren't eating well. And so I was like, you know what? We kind of stumbled across a higher fat, lower carb approach. And that kind of led us down a path of doing research on the ketogenic diet, and eventually started isolating out and saying, you know what? Maybe the benefits are driven by ketosis. Like, what if you could drink something? What if you could literally take ketones, put it inside of a powdered form and drink it? And for us, that kind of started down this huge rabbit hole of figuring out, all right, how do you do this? And that's kind of when we met Brian Underwood, and kind of the conversation just grew from there of figuring out, how do we take this to the masses? It's not a supplement. And I think that's really, really interesting, is because you think about this, like when someone drinks protein, or if someone takes creatine, there's one real benefit of that, right? Like there's a one benefit. And at first, the main benefit of ketones are that they are a different fuel source than carbohydrates or glucose, particularly for your brain. And now, why does that matter? Well, first off, after the age of 30, and this is in every single individual, after the age of 30, our brain's ability to utilize carbohydrates and glucose goes down significantly. Well, it's starting to happen to our brain. Our brain can't utilize glucose and carbohydrates as well. And so we have a totally other source of fuel. But before Pruvit, the only way that was really able to be accomplished was by extreme fasting or a ketogenic diet. And that's one. Ketones act on certain neurotransmitters in the brain that actually blunt hunger. Ketones help keep us really full, which is great, right? It allows us to go longer periods without hitting the snack cabinet. And then on top of that, so that's number two. And then another benefit that really can apply to anyone and everyone is that ketones have anti-aging properties. But the main three that can literally apply to you and every single person in your life that you know are a different, better source of fuel for the brain. It helps with appetite and hunger regulation, which those two alone apply to every single human being. And three is everyone's looking for anti-aging. Studies show that there are certain signals, I like to refer to them as light switches, like that turn off as we get older, right? And they're called histones. And they start to get turned off as we get older. It's one of the main mechanisms that we think drives aging. Ketones, and this has been shown over and over again in research, ketones actually act as like bodyguards to these light switches and say, you know what, nope, it's not time to turn off yet, let's keep the light switch on. And so we've actually published studies in animal models where we've literally fed animals ketones their entire lives, did nothing to their diet, and compared to their counterparts who did not have ketones, they had a placebo. The animals that had ketones had overall better health when we kind of at the end of their life. And that was extremely promising, and kind of one of the things that blew my mind and said, wow, this is much, much bigger than just a fuel conversation.
So what is the difference between a ketone ester and a ketone salt? I mean, ketone esters and ketone salts are very different. They both contain typically beta-hydroxybutyrate, though they could contain other ketone acetoacetate. The primary difference in a practical sense has to do with their chemical makeup and how the beta-hydroxybutyrate is bound to the carrier. So in the ester, as the name implies, it's bound to an ester. In the salt, it's typically bound to potassium, sodium, magnesium mix, some kind of a mix. The esters, for now, cost a lot and taste terrible. They're very efficacious, they're strong, they raise the level a lot. Right now, they run about $33 a dose. And so for many people, that's out of the question.
We're using a number of different strategies and studies to optimize ketones and human performance at ASPI right now. So we actually have a lot of NFL players coming through, guys who have had a lot of head injuries, concussions, and unfortunately after getting head trauma throughout their whole career, they actually don't perform as well cognitively.
SPECT imaging is a type of imaging that can look at the brain and look at blood flow and utilization in different areas of the brain.
What we found is that the keto nat actually brings them and normalize their levels so they can perform and function in everyday life.
So one of the things is we actually went and recently did a SPECT imaging scan, myself and Josh Perry. And what we found was that like my brain is really busy. There's a lot going on, and at rest that shouldn't be the case. There's a lot of noise, a lot of activity. And just after one serving of Keto Nat, we found that it basically stabilized my brain, allowed me to focus better and be more present in the moment. And that's something that I think we're gonna see a lot more keto research come out. Not only the ketogenic diet, but exogenous ketones as well, as how it can improve with that SPECT imaging.
We started out with metabolic testing at ASPI with Dr. Ryan Lowry and Jacob Wilson, and we did some cognitive testing just to see, trace eye patterns and then, cognitive function and performance, things like that. And so we're doing that at a baseline, but then we're also doing that with a Keto Nat consumed 30 minutes prior to other testing and just seeing the influences that it has, which, no surprise, cognitive performance increased and test results improved as a result. So just more of that, and then where we can go with SPECT imaging with exogenous ketones just to see how the brain blood flow and function improves with exogenous ketones. So it's really fun.
A lot of people basically in the nutrition industry really down ketogenic dieting. They say it's bad for human performance. Dr. Lowry and I were one of the first to actually study the impact of ketogenic dieting on strength, on power, and on muscle mass. So when we formulate products, we're testing all these different combinations and seeing what's optimal. Once we find that optimal combination at ASPI, that's the formula that we use in Pruvit. And what we've been doing with Pruvit is actually seeing that when you diet, you typically lose muscle mass. But when you actually are on ketones, it prevents that from happening.
What is Keto Pro? Essentially, it is the first ketone-infused protein on the market that's actually low calorie. And in fact, what's so exciting about it is if you look at a ketogenic diet itself, to get protein, to have enough protein to optimize muscle health, to have ratios that are important, you're essentially gonna have calories very high, like 500, 600, 700 calories. What we figured out is how to have a smaller amount of protein, but infuse it with the amino acids that are most important for muscle health to keep calories down to under 100.
So what Mitoplex does is it's based on research, extensive research, which looks at what's going down in your body when insulin's low when you're on a ketogenic diet. This is a study where blood electrolytes lowered after being on a ketogenic diet. So low carb is great, low carb is excellent, but electrolyte bounce can go down and you might feel weaker. It's important to understand it's not just electrolytes, there's a lot of electrolytes, there's a lot of things that change in your body. So that's why we call them upgraded electrolytes. If you look at upgraded electrolytes, it's not just things like potassium, they're bound in specific compounds like with bicarbonate, which is a specific buffer. Think about like when you're training hard and you get that burning sensation, bicarbonate's a buffer. And it goes down oftentimes on keto. So if you look basically at the ingredients, you'll notice that you have these electrolytes that are bound in different forms to optimize your health and overall optimize your performance. Does that make sense? It's not just all you need. So that's the first part of this formula. But an additional thing is that we have to be able to produce and utilize ketones, right? So we promote endogenous production of ketones and the ability to use exogenous ketones. And the way to do that is to optimize the internal machinery that you have. And where do we burn energy? Where do we create energy? And what? In the mitochondria. When you deplete yourself of carbohydrate, you have to rely on mitochondria to produce energy. But what if we could take a supplement that could turn on those systems? Would that be cool?
Everyone is interested in boosting their immune function. The best way to do that is to understand that there's a link between metabolism, your metabolic health, and your immune function. If your metabolic function is weakened, your immune function is weakened along with that, and you can't fight. The number one way as a company we're boosting your immune function is by making your metabolic function optimized. So how do we do that? Well, let's think about this for a second. Ketones make you more satiated, give you more energy, which makes you want to lose body fat because you're going to follow your diet better and you're going to exercise better. Now, the whole system around that is designed to support that. So let's look at the supporting products. If you look at Mitoplex, for example, Mitoplex improves mitochondria. Mitochondria, guys, are the core, the central core of metabolic health are mitochondria. So Mitoplex targets your body to increase mitochondria, and it does it in a dose-dependent fashion. So if you have 1 serving a day of Mitoplex, that'll help mitochondria. If you have 2, it'll help it more. If you have 3, it'll help it to an optimized level. So that's targeting metabolic function. Let's look at, for example, Keto Pro. The kind of protein that's in there and the amino acids that are in there help our muscles be healthier. Muscles are one of the #1 things that support metabolic function. A healthier muscle allows us to exercise more efficiently. A healthier muscle makes our resting metabolisms greater so that we can lose more body fat. So Keto Pro is targeting muscle health. So now we're targeting mitochondrial health. We're targeting better energy. We're targeting better muscle health. Also, you need your DNA to function better, right? So if your DNA is not functioning right, it's going to mess all your metabolic health up. So that's where Signal OS comes in. So you see Signal OS embedded in products, but you also see it, as a product that you can take. So that's repairing DNA so our metabolic health can be better. And then we give you direction on how to take these things. So you take the ketone challenge, right? You're taking a number of packets of ketones every single day. That's making sure that we're hitting our metabolic health. Now look at Reboot. What was Reboot designed to do? We know that these intermittent fasts improves all metabolic health, but we need to do it in a way that maintains muscle health, maintains immune function. So we supply support products around it, like ketones, like Keto Pro, like Keto Broth, which improves your joint function, and give you all these nutrients so you're not hungry during the reboot, and you're fasting, and you're not only improving the benefits of the fast, but you're not hungry.
I focus a lot on cognition, cognitive health, also women's health and hormones, and I work a lot with menopausal women, peri and postmenopausal women, and so I would say those are probably 2 really large areas of focus. So hormones in the body pretty much impact every biologic process. So they're going to impact cognition, weight gain, metabolism. So pretty much every system or function in the body is impacted by a hormone. Hormones are sort of chemical messengers. And so if there's an imbalance in a hormone, it's not just an imbalance in one system, it has downstream effects that impacts everything else. And what we've found is that beta-hydroxybutyrate can actually improve insulin resistance, meaning that your body doesn't have to produce as much insulin. That's a good thing because insulin is a storage hormone. So if you have a lot of insulin, it tells your body store fat right around the middle. So we often see that in women when they're moving into menopause, they naturally become insulin resistant. So all of a sudden they're doing everything they used to do, but they can't lose weight. That's because insulin is spiking and it's telling their body store fat right around the middle. There's something called estrogen dominance. When we have too much estrogen in relation to progesterone, that can actually throw off thyroid function because it causes a chain reaction where you end up binding thyroid hormones, so now your thyroid system is off. So an imbalance in one system will throw off the complete balance of another system. So they're all really interrelated and interconnected.
Do ketones aid in memory retention? And the answer is, I think they do.
There was this researcher in the 80s named Robert Sapolsky who showed that even when neurons became insulin resistant, that in fact ketones, exogenous ketones, were able to bypass the insulin resistance of the neurons and refeed the neurons and restore cognitive performance and also this restructuring of the brain and protecting it from the brain damage that occurred from cortisol. And so I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting point because maybe exogenous ketones are not just bypassing the insulin resistance that's associated with stress. Maybe more generally, they're able to bypass insulin resistance that occurs with aging.
Particularly if you've got them elevated sufficiently. As we age, our brains don't process glucose as efficiently. So even if you have enough glucose in the brain and now you start to get some kind of a neurologic disorder, one of the hallmarks of this is your brain is not able to utilize the glucose that's available to it effectively. So it has low energy, put simply. And the ketones, if it has access to ketones, it'll process those first.
Beyond all the other benefits that we know about ketones, one of the main ones that is really, really interesting, and we're starting to see a lot of emerging research on, is the mood stabilizing properties that ketones themselves have. And so not only does a ketogenic diet have mood stabilizing properties, but new studies are showing that that response is likely driven from ketones themselves, and they're doing studies with exogenous ketones seeing these same properties.
Your brain is involved in everything you do. If you want a successful life, school, work, money, relationships, spiritual life, it's critical to think about your brain.
Just talked about essentially, ketones and why they're important, the different types of ketones, and why Pruvit is the only company that actually has the key, the molecular signal that your body can take up and utilize. Think about your brain and think about your muscles, okay? So your brain sends a signal to the muscle to contract, and it contracts rapidly. So you need to be able to send a huge signal to your muscles to contract. Well, ketones, when you look at brain function, your brain prefers using ketones over glucose again. So it's a preferred fuel for the brain. So what happens is your brain lights up, you take ketones, and that actually makes you stronger and more powerful. So athletes can jump higher, they can lift more total weight. And so when you go to the gym or you're training, you perform better. But the thing about performance is it's not just a workout thing, it's not just for athletes. When you're looking at the grandfather who wants to play with their grandchildren, right? That's performance. When they're lifting the kid up in the air, when they're running after them, that's speed, that's power, that's performance. Or for example, if someone gets older and they just want to take their groceries to their car, right? When someone gets older, that becomes harder, right? That's strength, that's power, that's performance, and ketones can help each of those areas. Not all ketones are created equal, okay? Right? Again, think about the right hand and the left hand, right? So the main ketones that your body can actually use, the only company that has that is Pruvit, right? So that molecular signal, that fuel source, Pruvit's the only company that has the patented technology to actually use that. So again, think about this for a second. Ketones are super important for performance. They're super important for preserving muscle mass, and they're super important for elevating endurance, power, and strength. So thanks so much. See you guys next time.